Today is a sad day, not only in Mississippi, but the United States as a whole, for we have lost a soldier fighting in the war for racial inequality in America. He may not be as well known as Martin or as radical as Malcolm, but his spirit and strength is just as strong as theirs, if not even more. For today in Jackson, Mississippi, we have gathered to honor Medgar Evers and to shine light on his achievements to improve conditions for blacks in Mississippi. For as a black man myself, I've always been interested in African Americans' struggle for inequality, and Evers' death saddens me, but it also inspires me to continue to try and fight for what's right, no matter what the risk. And I feel that Evers' journey will inspire other civil rights leaders to fight harder and to pull together, just like how the slaves and abolitionists held together the Underground Railroad. For I want you all to remember that Medgar Evers was the embodiment of bravery and determination. And Medgar Evers was a very brave individual by speaking up against racism in a very racist state, and Medgar Evers showed determination by fighting for equal rights for blacks. And I do believe that there were points where Evers was scared to speak up against the racial injustice that he saw every day. But I feel that the fear of him not speaking up, I feel that the fear of what would happen if he didn't speak up is what really pushed him, like pressure turning coal into a diamond. Medgar Evers was a very brave individual by speaking up against racism in a very racist state. And Evers was no stranger to being in situations that put his life on the line, for he served his country in World War II, and he grew up as a black man in Mississippi, which is dangerous in of itself. And he also pushed against the soul-crushing racism and racial discrimination in Mississippi, which is one of the racist states known in this country. For one thing he did was investigate 9 racial murders, and as biography.com tells us, one of those was Emmett Till, who was only a 14-year-old boy who was lynched for only speaking to a white woman. And now Evers not only investigating this murder, but all the other murders could have gotten him killed himself, for the whites would have used him as an example to other blacks to stay out of their business. And Evers also helped U.S. Air Force member veteran James Meredith apply to the University of Mississippi. And even when a riot broke out from white counter-protesters, Evers and Meredith stood their ground, and eventually the U.S. Marshals came and took those anger-blinded protesters away, as Crowther tells us. And growing up in Mississippi, Evers witnessed the cage that racism put his people in. For almost every public area, including lunch counters, restrooms, and even water fountains were segregated, and black people usually got the shorter end of the stick. And eventually, after having to bear the second-class treatment for so long, Evers decided he was going to help set his people free from these invisible chains. For Evers was determined to gain equal rights for black people. And he started civil rights work as early as college, working with the Regional Council of Negro Leadership. And then he became the first field secretary for the NAACP and sacrificed much of his time working with them. And also, he began to travel around the state of Mississippi, and he was determined to attract the youth and to get them enthralled into NAACP and other civil rights activities. And this determined pursuit had staggering results. For NAACP's statewide membership doubled between 1956 and 1959 from about 8,000 to 15,000 members and activists, as Davis tells us. And then more people around Mississippi were being informed of those activities thanks to Evers' determination, and their membership continued to increase. And as Evers became more involved with other civil rights events, he helped organize and support the Woolworth sit-ins in Mississippi because he offered support to the blacks while they were protesting these businesses for not letting them sit in the same lunch counters as whites would. And they even protested against general businesses downtown in Jackson, Mississippi for doing the same thing. And then angry white counter-protesters came to attack the students just because they felt like they didn't have the same right as them to sit in those counters. And even through that attack, Evers was determined to continue to move on with the boycotts to eventually get their equality. And another example is when he offered his support in Biloxi beaches in Mississippi at the beach ends. And one of the most famous days was Bloody Sunday, which was when bloodthirsty counter-protesters came and attacked all the other protesters and students just because they wanted to be at the same beach as them. And even while they were getting beaten, Evers gave them a quote as powerful as a war cry. As Crowther tells us, "If we are to receive a beating, let's receive it because we have done something, not because we have done nothing." The determination that Evers showed shined brighter than 1,000 suns, and he was willing to continue to fight for what was right, even if it meant dancing closer to death. Medgar Evers was a very brave individual by speaking up against racism in Mississippi. And Evers was determined to gain equal rights for blacks. And I want my audience to feel that Medgar Evers was the embodiment of bravery and determination. And we can learn from Medgar Evers' example to continue to fight for what's right, no matter what stands in our way. And we must remember these actions that he did so that they'll never be lost to time. And I ask that you remember the words that I've told you, for it is our duty to carry on the torch that he has put the fire in our hearts. For if we continue to fight against this inequality, one day we can have racial equality, not just for blacks, but for all in the U.S.